What is going on, everybody? My name is Taetro. I'm a music producer, educator, content creator, beat maker. We're going to be using Ableton Live 11 today, which they've incorporated MPE functionality into the DAW now, which is going to help us take full advantage of the sounds in Equator 2 as well as the functionality of the LUMI Keys Studio Edition. And of course, our major goal today is to use those sounds and to use this keyboard to make some music. But first, before we even get started, you're going to want to go to roli.com/start and download ROLI Connect. That's going to be basically your hub for all of the software, your sound library, and the way that you update your hardware. Once you've got that installed, you've got ROLI Connect, and you're going to want to go ahead and install all of the software you're going to want to use today. We are going to be using sounds from Equator 2. We're going to utilize the ROLI dashboard, and we'll also use the ROLI Studio Player today. You can go through and install all your sound libraries, in addition to registering your hardware and making sure it's all up to date. Now, before we start making music, I do want to open up one of the applications we have, ROLI Dashboard. So first, you're going to want to make sure your ROLI LUMI is connected and powered on. Now, of course, your ROLI LUMI can be connected via Bluetooth, but today, since we're just sitting at the desk, we're going to connect via the USB-C port. So we're turned on, and with ROLI Dashboard open, we can see our LUMI block is recognized, and we can check for updates. If your LUMI Keys is new, it might need a firmware update, but this one is up to date. And basically in this screen in ROLI Dashboard, this is where we can do some customization to the controller and fine tune some settings if we want. And I just wanted to go over a couple before we get in and start making music. We can edit things like making sure it's in MPE mode, changing our pitch bend range. We can transpose and change the octave, as well as different sensitivity curves. We can set it to have a fixed velocity. And then down here is really where I want to spend a lot of time. First of all, in certain modes on our keyboard, we can actually set it to display a certain key. So this mode, for instance, is displaying a C major scale. You can see that the C's are illuminated red and these other keys are illuminated white. Those are all keys in the key of C major as it's set here in the ROLI dashboard. We can change the key of that though. Let's change our root note to D major. And now you see we've actually got a color change and the note arrangement has changed. Again, the root note of the scale, D, is illuminated in a specific color, orange, and the rest of the in-key notes are in white. You could do this with any of the root notes here in ROLI Dashboard, and you will be set to the proper key. This is a good guide for those of you who don't know many scales or are trying to learn new scales. And we don't have just major here, we have a bunch of different scales and modes available to us. I'm going to leave mine in C major for now. And in the keybed state here, it tells you which mode is active, modes 1, 2, 3, or 4. And you can see that I'm pressing the power button to scan through those modes. Those modes actually correspond to this menu over here, where we can customize the settings of each of the modes. When I'm working with the LUMI, I like to have a few different modes configured so that I can get the most out of the controller, or I can also take features away to have it just more like a basic keyboard. So for instance, mode 1 is displaying the Pro color scheme, aka is showing us a scale, and I've enabled pitch bend and enabled pressure on that. Mode 2, I just really like this blue color, so I've set it here in the settings. I've set both the global key color and the root key color to be the same. And again, I have pitch bend and pressure enabled. My third mode is your basic piano mode. This is what I was talking about. This doesn't enable any of the MPE functionality, no pressure, no pitch bend. It's just a normal keyboard. I don't have to worry about doing any pitch bends or applying any pressure or aftertouch or anything. And then the final mode, which is stage, which illuminates as I press the key. And in this mode, pitch bend is enabled, but pressure is not. It's just a configuration I find myself enjoying to use. You can set them accordingly. And now that we have those 4 modes set to our liking and our LUMI Keys is up to date, we can actually start making some noise with the ROLI LUMI Keys and Equator 2. Now, we've already installed Equator 2, and you can actually open it on its own. If I just search up Equator 2 here and open it, it's just a synth I can play. So let me go ahead and open up a pad preset here, Amethyst Cave. And immediately we're getting right into it. You heard me do pitch bend there, but remember this mode does not enable pressure. So actually let me go back to my Pro mode that shows the scale. We can hear that we're actually able to change the sound over time using pressure, and that is displayed on screen in Equator 2. You can see where each of those notes are landing, how much pressure is being applied, and how much bend is happening. It can bend both ways. You'll also notice that on the LUMI keys themselves, you'll see the colors change based on pressure and based on the bend. You'll see the color start to get more intense as we press harder, and you'll actually see the color start to shift depending on the direction we bend. Now this is really fun. We could just play Equator 2 on its own. If we go from the preset menu to the synth menu, we can actually see all of these parameters in action and what's actually happening with the synth. It looks a little intimidating at first, but we're going to break down a couple of the core pieces in this video series, so don't feel too intimidated. So far, we've set up our LUMI keys, we've played with some sounds in Equator 2 standalone, but now we're going to open it up within our DAW, which is Ableton Live 11, and start making some music. So if my Ableton Live starting template looks a little bit different from yours, don't panic. This is just a custom template that I've built, and all it contains is some MIDI tracks that are just empty, no instruments on them yet, and some audio tracks. Now you'll see some effects racks on there. That's just my basic audio processing racks. Contains compressor, EQ, and reverb. And if I use those, I'll let you know how I'm using them as we move forward. But there's no sounds on any of these tracks yet. We're also in Ableton Live's session view, which is the default view that when you open up Ableton Live, it shows you. And it's a convenient view. We've got clip slots for recording little loops and ideas into. However, I'm going to press the Tab key and go over to Arrangement View. Now, I've been working in Arrangement View more and more lately, and only thing you have to think about here is you have a timeline at the bottom. So this is like your linear DAW, pretty typical. You have a mixer on the right. Each track has its own gain, and track on and off, pan, the things you would expect from a mixer. The bottom view here will contain our devices, our instruments, and their effects. And if we open up this little tab on the side, we'll see our library, which is where we will get Equator 2, which we want to drop into this project here. Now you just want to double check your ROLI Connect and make sure that you have it all properly installed. Anything you want to use should say, open. It shouldn't say redeem or install or anything like that. That goes for your sound libraries as well. Make sure all the sounds you want to use are properly installed. And let's actually go into Preferences, Live, Preferences, and make sure that we are connected by going to Link, Tempo, and MIDI. Under Control Surfaces, we should be able to find blocks. From there, we can check our input, LUMI Key Block, LUMI Keys Block, and the LUMI Keys block for input and output. Now, thankfully, Ableton Live 11 contains MPE, which does not exist in earlier generations of Ableton Live. We just want to make sure that for our LUMI Keys blocks input right here, we have track checked and MPE checked, so we can utilize that MPE functionality. Another quick note in the preferences, let's go to audio and just check that our audio output device is set to the thing that we're plugged into with our headphones, whether that's your just headphone jack or your audio interface like me today. Then you're also going to want to check your buffer size. Mine is currently at 64 samples, which is a pretty low number. This number here is what's going to allow you to play notes into your DAW with the keyboard and not experience any noticeable latency. The lower you can get this number, the better. However, some machines can't handle a super low buffer size, so you may have to raise the number to say 128 or above, but the higher you go, the more noticeable and unplayable that latency becomes. So just try to get the lowest number you possibly can and not have any audio glitches or errors while you're playing. I also want to note too that ROLI's powerful synths do consume a fair amount of CPU. And as we go through building up the layers of this track, we will be freezing tracks and finding ways to mitigate that CPU usage, but I'll talk you through that when we get there. For now, just set this buffer size as low as you can go without having any errors in sound. Okay, well, let's drop Equator 2 in. If we've installed everything properly and we go to our plugins menu on the library here, we can go under either audio units or VST3. Easiest way to find Equator 2 is just to search it up in your library. And you'll notice that all three of these options appear. Equator 2 is available in audio units and VST3. You probably won't know the difference depending on which one you pick. I'm just going to pick VST3 here because it works for me. And I'm going to drop it onto a MIDI track, not an audio track. I'll drop it on a MIDI track. And now we have Equator 2 loaded up here on track 3. I'm going to play some notes, but wait, there's no sound because we need to arm our track. We need to tell Ableton Live that this is the track we want to control. Press the arm button here, it's red, and now we can get started making some sound, and that's a pretty intense synth we've opened up with here. But nonetheless, why don't we find something a little less intense in the preset menu? And what you might notice here are different icons next to each synth. Just note that this blue icon represents MPE instruments, and the orange icon represents just standard instruments. We're going to sort by MPE here. We're also going to sort by Equator 2 sounds. Now, I'm a big fan of this analog synth ensemble pad sound. So let's load that up. This is Equator 2 sound. So if we go back to the synth engine, we'll be able to see. And now we can make some music with it. Now remember, as you can probably see here, I'm not getting any pressure sensitivity or anything. I'm trying to bend, there's no bend happening. That's because this particular mode on my LUMI does not have those two features enabled. I need to switch the mode to access a mode that actually enables the pressure and the pitch bend. That's much better. Okay, so I noted in the first part that the synth looks pretty intimidating, and it is slightly intimidating, but it's nothing we can't handle. First and foremost, most of these presets have macro knobs. So if you're looking to just make some easy fundamental changes to the sounds, check this macro panel here, because we can very easily make some adjustments to our sound and totally transform them based on the way the sound designers have set up these macros. These are essentially the settings that the sound designer wants you to play with, I would say. So start there if you're a little scared. If you know anything about synths, you've tweaked an amp envelope before, but if you haven't, I'll just walk you through this because this is a very simple way to transform a sound as well. We have our attack, our decay, our sustain, and our release. Let's go through them one by one. And as you can see, it's represented by a graph here. This initial slope being the attack. Here we have the decay, the sustain, and then the release. You can either turn the knobs or change the graph. So if I put the attack all the way down here, that initial sound is right there in your face. It happens as soon as I press the note. If I change this to be a slope like this, that's what we'll hear from the initial attack of the sound. Listen to how long it's taking to build up over time. Again, back here. Turn up the attack. So we can very easily edit the sound that way. The decay is what happens to the sound once it reaches that point. You can see it slopes down a bit. If we want to just bring that up, we don't really hear a reduction in sound. If we bring it all the way down, we hear that up and down motion that is symbolized by this little triangle we made here. Sustain is, of course, what happens as we hold out the note. And release is what happens when we release the note. If I turn the release up, when I release the note from the keyboard, it has quite a long tail here. It continues to float on, as you can hear. If I shorten that release, when I let go of this note, it just ends. So that is another fundamental way you can shape sounds in most synths, actually, but it's readily available to you in Equator 2 right here. Now, what makes LUMI special are the MPE capabilities. Listen to this as I play. I'm not just playing a set of notes, but I'm able to ease into it. And that can be a lot of fun. And one of the functions you're hearing change over time there, let me shorten my release back up, is pressure. Now watch this curve as I apply more and more pressure. Obviously the peak is that super bright sound and I have to apply the most pressure to get there. But we can change that curve. So if we never want it to get that high, I can bring this curve down. And adjust how much of an effect pressure has on the sound over time. There's also a parameter called lift. Now try to listen carefully when I play a note and then lift off the keys. When I lift aggressively like that, you can see this spike up right here and lift. I don't always like that effect. I think it's very cool that the MIDI controller not only detects when we're pressing notes, but when we're also releasing them. I think that's pretty dope. But sometimes I don't want that to happen in my sound, in which case I can just bring that down. I don't get that kind of extra sound at the end when I lift off aggressively. Very fundamental ways you can change sounds here. If you start with a preset, it makes it much more achievable. But why don't we just lay down a very, very basic little progression, a bed of sound to build our song on top of. So in Ableton Live, we're in arrangement view again, we're on the timeline. I have these brackets here and I've just clicked on these brackets. And right now it's set to be 6 bars long. Most kinds of music, and for us starting out today, we're gonna work in increments of 4 or 8. So I'm gonna extend this out to be 8 bars long, 8 total bars. Remember, we don't wanna stop at the number 8 here. That only gives us 7 full bars. We wanna extend through the 8th bar. And we can set our tempo, and to hear that tempo, we can turn the metronome on and press play. That's a pretty fast tempo. I'm going to click on the 170 and drag it down. The 170 is our BPM. Let's do this at 110 today. We'll make something a little more chill. Now you'll see our timeline is extending beyond where I put these brackets. For right now, I want to enable looping. And what that will do is it will contain our working space to this bracketed 8 bars. You see that it kicked back to bar 1 there as it went through the cycle. So now what I want to do is, like I said, just lay down a bed of sounds to build this track on. I'm just going to play a very simple little progression here. I'm going to gently change the pressure over time and maybe add a little bit of bend to give it almost a VHS quality sound, a little bit of wobble like cassette tape or something. So to make sure I'm starting at the first bar, I'm going to press stop. We'll notice that this changed to 1.1.1. And then I can press record. And record will give me a count in of 4 beats. So it's going to count to 4 and then I can start. Watch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you notice my start there was very, very messy. I've just pressed the space bar to stop it from recording and going on. And I'm just going to hit Command Z to get rid of what I just made. Let's try again. Let's hit stop and hit record. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's started to loop around again. I don't have to continue playing. I'm pressing space there again to stop. And what it did was it started to record a new idea within the space over what I had already played. This is the second thing that it started recording. This is the first initial idea that it was overwriting. I'm going to delete that first one by just clicking on it and pressing backspace. And I'm going to extend this back to the beginning. Now we have our original, 8-bar clip, which we can double click on and examine down here below. And now we have the MIDI information. I'm going to go ahead and press this fold button, which will only show us the notes that we played. You'll see that I didn't play quite on time based on this grid. We're a little bit off, but that's okay because we can select all of the notes here and hit Command-Shift-U to quantize. We can change what rate we want to quantize it to. This was a very slow played pattern, so I can bring it down to 1/8 notes if I want. And the quantization amount. If you don't want it rigid and on the grid, you can bring it down to about 70 or to your taste. I'm going to leave mine at 70 for now, and I'm just going to press OK. And you saw for this F especially, it brought it that much closer to the downbeat. It didn't put it directly on because we're not 100% quantized, but it did bring it much closer. So perceivably, it'll sound pretty good. Quantizing it to 100% will get you right on the line every single time. So now we've got our musical idea. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my metronome for now. You can hear some of the bends and pressure changes were recorded, which makes the sound just that much more dynamic over time. Now, if I bring up this menu down here, that's the velocity. That's how hard or soft I hit a note. But with MPE, we can also take a look in Ableton Live by clicking this button right here at our pressure over time. Our pressure and slide, by the way. But here's our pressure pattern over time. And not only that, you can actually go in and edit this by clicking in. So if you say applied a little bit too much pressure over time, you can adjust it. You can adjust entire sections like this, highlight, and bring it down. I'm pretty satisfied with how the pressure came across, and this is a good bed of sound to build our track on. Now we're going to add an additional layer on top of our pad loop that we made here to start building out our track. And actually, before I add the additional layer of Equator 2, I'm going to play back our loop here. And I think we need something rhythmic to keep us going. So I'm going to go into my sample packs and just find a rhythmic loop. I'll find a loop from my space sample pack. This is a space shaker sound, and I'm going to drag and drop this onto this empty audio track I have here. We notice that it's only 4 bars, but that's okay. We'll duplicate it in a minute. Let's just hear how that sounds. It's a little bit loud. I'll bring the volume down. And with this EQ I have here on the track, this EQ8, I'll go ahead and turn on that 8th band, which is a low pass, and I'll shave off some high frequencies since we are going for a kind of a lo-fi sound. Great. One last step I'm going to do and edit this sound. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to change this to Beats Warp mode, and I'm going to make this sound a little tighter, a little shorter by changing this transient mode here. There we go. Just something rhythmic to propel us forward, seeing we only have these long drawn out chords from Equator so far. Since it is only 4 bars long and we want it to be 8, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this pattern. And that's Command D. You can also very easily Command C and then click where you want it to land, and Command V, copy paste. But Command D works if you want it to be right next to it. All right, now we have some rhythmic structure, and we need a blank MIDI track. If you don't have a blank MIDI track, you can go to Create, Insert MIDI Track. This is also where you can insert additional audio tracks as well. We already have a blank MIDI track here, so let's go back to our plugins, Equator 2, and let's drop another instance of Equator 2 on here. Now I want to add something plucked on top, and there's actually a really great koto sound in here. It's called Cinematic Koto as one of the presets. All right, I've loaded that preset. I'm going to go back to the synth, and now I want to hear that sound. But what I'm hearing now is the previous synth we were on. That's because, once again, we need to arm the 4th track that holds this new sound. So now I've got it record armed. And since Equator 2 is such a powerful synth engine, what I'm going to want to do to preserve CPU is I'm actually going to exit that for now. And since we are not going to alter this sound at the moment, other than maybe some volume, this initial sound that we recorded, I'm going to right click on it and press freeze. And what this will do is allow it to not have to run the synth engine the whole time in the background. It's one step before printing it to audio. We have the freedom to go back and unfreeze if we want, but it's not doing the intense thing of running the plugin each time through. It's kind of freezing it as audio for the moment. So I really enjoy utilizing Equator 2 for sounds like this koto sound. If you've ever played a string instrument or guitar, you know that bending is just part of what you do, and the pitch bend here gives you a very natural approach to that. I just really think that's a beautiful, natural way to play this instrument, but still be using a keyboard. So don't forget, we've got our macro knobs if we want to add something like, it seems a little bit more reverb here. Perhaps even some chorus. We can turn up the speed. It gives us a little XY pad here, so we can change those two parameters by manipulating the XY pad. We also have the ability to play this sound in a more harsh timbre by pressing really hard. This is going to be a much louder sound here. Now that we've chosen this sound, we're going to go ahead and record an additional layer. We're going to create a melody with this koto sound on top of our shaker and our pad loop. All right, so I'm going to bring the volume down of that pad, and that gives us the space to add a melody on top with this koto sound. I'm going to bring the volume of this up here. And I think I have a good sense of what melody I want to play, so let's go ahead and record it. I'm going to press the stop button again just to make sure we're starting at 1. And I'm going to press this record button. It will again give us a 4-bar count in. Let's go ahead and record it. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm pretty satisfied with that. We got a little bit of that bending in there. Let me go ahead and get rid of that overwrite that it was trying to do there and just drag that back to the 1. And let's open up our MIDI menu here. Again, I double clicked on the MIDI clip to show the MIDI notes. We can of course always switch back to our device by clicking down here in the right hand corner. And the MIDI window is right there too. I'm going to go ahead and Command A, select all the notes, and Command U, which is our shortcut for quantization. Remember that we're not quantizing to 100%, so we're getting close, but not 100%. I really like this. I'm going to bring down the pad a bit more, bring down the shaker a bit as well, maybe even shave off a little more highs from the shaker. Of course, edit this sound, add a little bit more reverb. Now, what if I wanted to overdub on top of that sound? Well, we can do that by pressing this plus button right here. Now I want to keep this original idea without any overdub, so what I'm going to do is just drag it over outside of our bracket. and then hold Options or Alt and drag it back over. And what that did was create a duplicate. So now we're going to record on top of this duplicate. So with the plus button checked, that's our overdub. Instead of overwriting everything that we just recorded, it's going to record notes on top of, in addition to the notes that are already there. So let's do that. I'm pretty satisfied with that. I'm going to turn recording off. And now we have a slightly more interesting melody with additional levels to it. If we want, we can go back and change velocities of individual notes if we think a note poked out a little too high amongst the rest. But right now, everything's looking decently even, decently human with these velocities, so I'm okay with keeping it. And again, if in our track making process, we want to go back and use just the simplified version of the loop, we have it here. The whole principle behind working this way is right now we're just building up a loop with a bunch of layers, and then later on, we'll go ahead and line these up on the timeline in a way that makes sense in terms of song structure. All right, so since I'm pretty satisfied with that sound, let's go ahead and preserve some CPU and right click and freeze that track. Now we've already started building up our track here with a chord loop and a koto melody, and those are both utilizing Equator 2 within the DAW Ableton Live. But now we're going to switch gears and we're going to actually load up ROLI Studio Player. Now if you're not sure if you have ROLI Studio Player, don't forget you can check your ROLI Connect app, go to Apps, and just double check to make sure you have ROLI Studio Player installed. And the same way we loaded up Equator 2, we could actually go into our plugins and find in the folder that contains the ROLI plugins, the ROLI Studio Player. And we want to drag and drop this onto an empty MIDI track. Now, if you don't have any MIDI tracks loaded, you can of course go to Create, Insert MIDI Track, or you can drag it in this empty space here. Let's just drag this onto track 5. So ROLI Studio Player loads within the DAW and completely takes over our LUMI in a good way. We will have to make some adjustments though. If you remember, we've been playing in C major. So we can check the key of ROLI Studio Player right here, and currently it's in C minor. So let's just switch that really quick and we'll see that correspond to our keyboard. So now all the notes of C major are illuminated. As usual, we have octave control, and you'll see that displayed there on the screen in ROLI Studio Player. And we have access to a sound library, which does include Equator 2 fundamentals. So if you are liking the sounds of Equator 2 so far, you can find a collection of sounds within the ROLI Studio Player as well. And we have different modules here that give us different controls over the sound. And we're actually going to utilize the Smart Chords feature for the sound that we're going to work with next. And so I know that there's this great nylon guitar sound within ROLI Studio Player called Nylon Guitar in a Golden Room. It's part of the Equator 2 collection. So I'm going to load it up, again, selecting the one with the blue icon because that represents an MPE instrument versus the orange, which is just standard, no MPE functionality there. So I've loaded up that instrument, the color has changed accordingly, and I've got access to my pitch bend and pressure. Now you want to make sure with this note right here, this little eighth note symbol, that you have pitch bend and pressure enabled or disabled to your liking, but just double check that it's set properly the way you want. And not unlike Equator 2, we have access to macros here like chorus. I like a little bit of chorus and a little bit of reverb. And we can adjust the body tone. But like I alluded to earlier, we're going to actually utilize this with smart chords because we've already got a melody with the koto on top. What I want is to actually play some chords. So I'm going to enable the smart chords module here. And actually, as you go up the keyboard, on every note of the key of C, it will build a chord for you. A chord that actually corresponds properly to the key that you're playing. Meaning that when I play a chord on C, it plays me a C major chord. And since we're in the key of C major, when I play an A, it plays me an A minor chord. So all these chords are in key. Not only that, but you'll also notice within the ROLI Studio Player that for each scale degree, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, we can add layers of complexity to each chord. So let's hear what it sounds like as a 7th. Now we've got the 7th there. Raise it up and get the 9th. We'll continue to stack notes on top. And what's really nice about the LUMI keys is if you don't know much about extensions and tensions and adding things to chords like this, we can see it all laid out for us here. We can see that this chord is comprised of a C, E, G, and a B. Now, we kind of went between a C major and an F in our initial synth loop, so I want to mimic that within the guitar here. So let me go ahead and set my F chord here to be a little more interesting, more than a basic triad, which by the way, I can go even lower. It'll just play me a 5th, which is not a complete chord. It's just an interval, but you can go more basic than the triad. But let's go up. What about a 6th? That sounds pretty nice. Go an octave lower. I like that a lot. But when I think of guitar, I think of strumming down the strings. That sounds a lot more natural. And what I actually think I want to do is engage this strum functionality, which, if we move to the right, it'll play from the bottom to the top. And the further along we go on this spectrum, the longer it will take to play through those notes. If we go to the left side, it will play down the chord. Both are nice, but I think I'm going to go with a from the bottom up approach. That kind of mimics a more natural guitar. And what we can also do is add a bass note. You can see this in ROLI Studio Player, but it actually added a lower C there. Same for the F, it'll add a bass note. Let's keep that. Then there's also an auto invert thing that we can check here, which will try to keep the notes in our chord all much closer together, which gives it a more of a natural sound. The closer these notes are together as we transition from chord to chord, the less jumpy and more natural the progression will sound. So why don't we go ahead and just record this chord progression with our track. I also want to note really quick that if you exit out of ROLI Studio Player, it's still there, but your keyboard will lose the display that it's showing when it's open on screen. All right, let's get our track going here. We're going to press stop and then play. I think we can go up an octave. And I think that 7th chord is not quite fitting, actually. Let's bring it to a 9th. That probably will sound better. Let's do that again. Much better. Really like that sound in that range, and those extensions are great. I'm going to go ahead and record that. F chord. All right, great. Just keep it simple like that. Now we've got these two nice, beautiful strummed chords here. I can go ahead in again and quantize them. Select them both, Command U. They were pretty close anyway. And now we've got this really decent sound. It's a really nice strum chord sound, which I like a lot. Now, of course, what are we missing? We're missing some drums. So let me go ahead and just quickly freeze this track so it doesn't occupy our precious CPU space. And then we're going to add drum samples to a drum rack and play some drums on the LUMI keys. All right, so of course Live has a whole host of drum samples you can choose from and drum kits as well. If you have a decent enough sample library, you can search through and find samples that you like. I'm going to use a couple samples that I actually recorded myself. And I've got a track here with a drum rack on it. Drum rack holds a bunch of different samples inside of it, and what I can do is drag samples from my library, like this kick sample, and drag it onto C1 there. Now if I arm this drum rack, and I set my LUMI to the proper octave, I can play that kick, which is great. Now let's just add one more sound. I've got some perks in here that I really like that work for like a kind of snare stick sound. That sample's a little low, so I'm going to right click on it and normalize it. There we go. And all we have to do is add a simple kick snare pattern. Shave some highs off. I'm going to turn highs down in the EQ. This is where my basic audio processing rack comes in handy because it's got an EQ built in, and I have this macro knob here set so that I can just take off highs when I need to. Now our return reverb can add a little bit of reverb on top, which I think will fit nicely. Same way we've been recording things before, I'm going to make sure I'm starting at bar 1, beat 1, and I'm going to press record. Great, we've got a nice solid drum loop here, which we can of course go in and quantize them. And maybe that snare didn't need to be so loud after all, actually. Let me select that sample and just bring the gain down a bit. Bring down even more highs. I think the drums in general are a little loud. Okay. One technique I like to use, which is called sidechain compression. Get everything pumping with the kick. You don't have to apply it to everything. I tend to do it when I'm working in lo-fi. So I'll go to Dynamics, Compressor, and I will drop a compressor in here. That's an audio effect. I'm dropping that on my shaker track for now. I'm going to open up this side menu here and set to sidechain. Select my drum rack as audio from, and then specifically select my kick. What you'll notice here as I press play is that it's receiving a signal from my kick drum. So now if I bring my threshold down, it will duck under the kick drum every time the kick hits. It's not super noticeable yet. Well, it's noticeable on the shaker, but I would like to add this to my other tracks as well. So I'm going to hit Command C. And now I have to unfreeze these tracks really quick just to add this sidechain to them. Add sidechain here. I'm just copying and pasting that same sidechain compressor from the shaker, pasting it on here. It might be a little bit aggressive, so I might go through and pull back on the dry wet for some of these. Okay, this is sounding pretty good. We added a sound utilizing the Smart Chords feature in ROLI Studio Player, and now we're going to add one additional sound on top of all this, and we're going to use ROLI Studio Player again, but utilize the multi-layer arpeggiator. So let's go ahead and go into our plugins folder, find the ROLI Studio Player, and drag it onto an empty MIDI track or just into this empty space here. So now that I've loaded ROLI Studio Player up, I'm going to go ahead and arm that new track that I just made so I can play sound. And I'm not thinking this synth sound is going to fit our need. All right, so I found this nice new marimba sound within the ROLI Studio Player. It's another sound from the Equator 2 sound set. I think this will fit nicely on top of our track. We have macros that will allow us to adjust the sound. I want to add a little bit of reverb to it. I'm going to adjust the timbre slightly as well. That sounds pretty good. And now we want to utilize, of course, the arpeggiator. So let's turn on the multi-layer arpeggiator. And if you've used an arpeggiator before, you know that if you play multiple notes, it doesn't play them together like a chord. Instead, what it does is plays them through in succession and repeats that pattern. And what's really cool about LUMI is that we can see exactly what's happening within this pattern right on the keys. So it's playing through all the notes that I play, and it's playing through them in a specific pattern, right? If we take a look at the arpeggiator, it's playing basic 16ths as a pattern. There are going to be 16 hits in a cycle. It's playing them straight with no swing. It's playing them in an upward direction. If we switch that to down, of course, we'll hear the difference. Now it's playing down the pattern. And it's playing at a rate of 16th notes, of course, and there's only one octave playing. Let's go through some of these parameters just to see what they do. If we bring hits down, we will hear the pattern change. Since it's not playing a total of 16 16th notes, there's some space in between, so we get a little bit of a different rhythm when we bring the hits down to 10 hits. If we offset it, it'll basically just rotate through that pattern, offsetting it, like it says. And of course we could change the rate. I could bring this down to 8th notes. Bringing up the octave means that it will not only play the octave of the notes that you're playing, but it will play an additional octave above that as well. And even though our LUMI is only 24 notes here, we can see it actually on screen that it goes beyond the range of our current instrument with that top note. So those are all parameters we can adjust. I'm going to bring that back up to 16ths. Actually, let's bring it down so it's a little more interesting rhythm. But the thing about this arpeggiator is it's multiple layers. So then we can click to layer 2 and add a totally different rhythm. So let's switch this from basic 16ths to something like 2-part dotted. So now we have both of these layers playing at the same time. And of course, then there's a third layer, which each of these you can individually adjust all of these different parameters to get different types of interlocking rhythms. So we can see all those layers are represented in this circle. We can see where hits are matching up or not matching up. So you can get really complex rhythms like this, and it looks really cool on the LUMI too. But how does this fit in with our track? Let's actually go hit stop there and play back the sound that we already have. Let's see if we can at least add a simple layer on top here. I'm gonna add in send this to some reverb within Live. That's nice on top. Okay, I actually really like that. I think I'm just going to play a very simple pattern like this on top. Because it's a multi-layer arpeggiator, you're not going to see me moving my hands that much. I'm just going to move kind of one note at a time, and it still gives me an interesting, complex rhythm to play. So hitting record, getting that 4-beat count in, and we're recording. Satisfied with that. All right, I'm gonna press spacebar and stop recording there. Taking a look at the MIDI, we have these chords here. Now, if I recall, I have everything sidechained. So this marimba instrument here is actually not a sidechain to the kick, which is making it poke out a little bit. So I'm going to go to the shaker, right click, copy the sidechain over, and we're going to sidechain this as well, which will get it bouncing with the kick. Now, of course, there's effects and ways to change the sound built into these macros within ROLI Studio Player, but don't sleep on Ableton Live's audio effects. Like I've got a reverb built in here to my rack, just a very basic reverb. We can add some to this. Very spacey. I'm gonna bring it back in the mix, bring the volume down a bit. Maybe even shave off some highs, perhaps add some width. And now all together, what we have now are some drum sounds that I pulled from my own library. Beautiful synth pad from Equator 2. A koto melody that utilizes that beautiful bend to get a really nice natural plucked string sound. Then we use the Smart Chords feature to strum some chords on a nylon guitar preset. Very nice. And then finally adding this sparkly, multi-layer arpeggiated marimba instrument. Add that in with the drums. And we have the basis of a pretty decent, chill, kind of lo-fi track here. And hopefully you found this to be a really simple setup here with the LUMI keys within Ableton Live 11 and just opening up things like Equator and ROLI Studio Player within the DAW itself. And if you've been following along and you build up your own 8-bar loop, the next step in finishing your track would be to zoom out on your timeline and to start building towards structuring this track. You can extend these brackets. We actually don't need to be looping anymore if we're thinking about extending our track. Think about a target length you want to hit. Maybe you want to hit about 2 minutes. And how can you build up your track? Say the drums don't need to come in right away, so we move all the drum loops over. Maybe we just start with these chords, so we move all our other sounds over as well. And then you slowly start to build up an arrangement this way. This could be your intro. And then you could have your koto enter. Maybe those chords drop out actually. Let's save the glockenspiel for later. I'm using the duplicate button a lot, right? Command D, Command D. Now here I'll Command D this as well. Now we'll have drums, shaker, and all these sounds coming in at once. Shaker enters, and we're working in sections of 8, right? Building these sections that are about 8 bars long and working our way through the track. So maybe what happens next is our drums fade away. And we give this little solo its time to shine. And maybe we even bring back in these synth pads here. We introduce that new glockenspiel sound. I'm going to copy this drum loop, enter everything back in here at bar 33. And now we'll have everything play together here. And let's continue the glockenspiel loop as well. So this is just how you start building up your track and structuring it across the timeline. And don't be afraid to go and add more layers in later too, because it's not just about the musical ideas that you already came up with in the looping stage. You might say, hey, at this section where the drums go away, I might want to add maybe some different drums, or I might want to add one additional instrument that brings this section to life a little bit more. It's up to you in this arrangement process, but you can see how we just transformed a simple 8-bar loop with a collection of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sounds into about a 1 minute and 30-ish second beginning of a track here. So continue on, try more of the sounds in Equator 2, dive more into the synth engine and editing the sounds to be more to your liking. Don't feel too intimidated by it, and utilize all those awesome modules within ROLI Studio Player like the Arpeggiator and Smart Chords to make even more interesting sounds for your tracks. I hope you did enjoy this series, and I hope this helped you get up and running making music with your LUMI and some of ROLI's sounds within Ableton Live. If you did enjoy it, please let us know in a comment, give this video a thumbs up, and if you like my style of teaching, you can check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Taetro, or you can find me on Instagram at Taetro, Taetro. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Taetro for ROLI. Have a good one.